Hi again then guys, and welcome to episode 60 of B-Road Ballers, the review series for Gran Turismo's hot hatch lineup, some of which are hotter than others, some are kind of lukewarm rather than hot, and this particular vehicle is a car which you could make an argument for featuring in possibly a different series other than hot hatches, because although it is a hatchback, it doesn't really look like one. It looks much more like a small off-roader, or a soft-roader, as they're often called, and as such, surely it deserves a place in the Heavy Hitters series, alongside vehicles like the Range Rover Evoque and various others. Well, visually, yes, an argument could be made for that, but in reality, this is not an off-roader, this is not a soft-roader, this certainly isn't a 4x4 because it's front-wheel drive, it's a hatchback. It's a big hatchback, a pumped up one, a jacked up one as far as ride height goes, but it's still a hatchback nonetheless, and being as it is the Cooper variant of it, it's a hot hatch, even though it doesn't really look like one. Now the Minis on Gran Turismo have kind of a quiet, but nonetheless definitely there, level of respect from people who drive them. They are a lot better than you'd probably expect them to be in the grand scheme of things. The Cooper S, for instance, which we reviewed in this series before, is a brilliant 500 pp car, in fact one of the best, and the classic version, which technically isn't the classic, it's the newer BMW built version from 1998, but in the style of the old car, is ever popular. People love that car, and it's not hard to see why. This car is another one of those that I would categorise in with the Cooper S and the classic style Cooper, because many of the Minis can look much of a muchness. They look different, but not by much. Now this car stands out, mainly due to its visuals. It's a bigger version of the concept of a new Mini, and that makes it niched. It also means that it's different. It's potentially the kind of car that you could buy if you're looking for something within Mini, but something which isn't just another Mini. And for that, it's pretty good. Now, the specs that it has to work with, in particular in fully tuned form, are actually better in some ways than you might assume. First of all, we've got the price. This car costs just under 35,000 credits, and although that's not amazingly good, it's not bad either. That's roughly the same kind of price as most other hatchbacks in that kind of territory. As far as the engine, it's powered by a 1.6 turbo, like most Mini Coopers. It's front-wheel drive, as we already said. You're looking at 354 horsepower when fully tuned. And as far as torque, it puts out 288 foot-pounds. So the numbers aren't amazing, but they're similar to the smaller Minis, such as the Cooper S, which I mentioned is such a good car. Now, as far as weight, this is heavier than some of the other Minis, but at the same time, given how much beefier it looks, it's still not a heavy car at all. In fact, this car is lighter than many hot hatches, which you'd probably assume it would be heavier than. This car only weighs 1,077 kilos. That's really impressive, given how big and bulky it looks, on its own at least. If you actually put it next to another hatchback, it's not as big as it looks on its own, but that's the idea of the design. As far as horsepower per tonne, it doesn't lose that much, due to the fact that the weight is very close to a tonne, and the horsepower per tonne is 329, which although isn't phenomenal, is pretty much what you'd want from a tuned hatchback. Anything from the 300 region up is pretty good. Now, as far as its all-round ability, and if it's actually worth buying instead of other Minis, or beyond just Minis instead of other hot hatches in general, I would say this does have its uses. It's a pretty good off-roader, it certainly looks the part, it's fun to drive. I personally think that it's a very good-looking car. It's probably my favourite Mini in the game, which isn't really saying much, but nonetheless. And as far as trackability, not surprisingly given the height of the car, the bulkiness of it, it's not quite as sharp through corners as something like the Cooper S, certainly not compared to the classic shape model, but it does handle itself very well, because even though it's bulkier, it's still not heavy. So although the physical size of the car takes up more space, it's still not that big, and it's lighter than a car of its type would probably usually be. So although the centre of gravity on the car is a bit taller than you'd ideally want it to be, which can to some degree be remedied by lowering the ride height of course, the weight is still relatively low, and so the body roll is pretty good. The handling isn't too heavy. It is heavier than other Minis, but still not that heavy. And I would say this actually handles better than some other hot hatches which you'd expect to be superior to it. As far as straight line performance, it's not overly quick, but none of the Minis really are. That's not really what they're good at. The Minis are good for cornering potential, and in particular their cornering speeds can be very good. And on a track where it's more about average speed rather than just flat out speed, like the Nürburgring and other places as well, Ascari, Laguna Seca, tracks like that are really ideal for these cars because the top end performance and top end power doesn't really matter as much, and the cornering speeds mean that even if you don't win, you'll always be up there with the best of them. And although this car isn't quite as quick as the other Minis, certainly not through corners, I'm not going to lie and say that it is, you can feel that extra size, it's still not bad at all. So if you're looking for something a little bit different within the hot hatch category, or something which does run the line between hot hatch and almost an off-roader but not quite, then you may want to check out the Countryman, because it's a charming car, it's a good looking car, as in my opinion I said, and overall it's not amazing in any particular way, but it's certainly not bad either. But that's it for this overall pick. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.